You are standing in absolute darkness. Not the soft darkness of a clouded night, the suffocating, pressing darkness of a desert sky before the moon rises. Around you, the earth of northern Mesopotamia stretches flat and featureless in every direction. The ground beneath your sandals is hard as iron. The air smells of horses, dung fires, and the faintly metallic tang that soldiers learn to associate with mass fear. The collective sweat of 47,000 human beings who know that tomorrow morning they may not be alive. You are a soldier in Alexander's army. You are Macedonian, probably, or Greek, or one of the allied Thessalian cavalrymen. But whoever you are, you've marched nearly 3,000 miles from home. You have crossed the Hellespont. You have fought at Granicus. You have driven Darius III himself from the field at Issus. You have walked into Egypt as a liberator. You have been crowned in the temple of the oracle at Siwa as the son of a god. And now you are here. On this flat, merciless plain east of the ancient city of Nineveh, a place called Gaugamela, somewhere out there, in the darkness beyond the glow of your campfires, is the largest army you have ever faced. Persian infantry by the hundreds of thousands. Scythed chariots designed to slice through formations like razors through cloth. The finest cavalry of the eastern satrapies, Bactrians, Sogdians, men on horses that make your companion cavalry look small. War elephants from India standing 15 feet tall, their tusks capped with iron. And at the center of all of it, Darius III, King of Kings, ruler of the greatest empire on earth. Now, ask yourself honestly, would you sleep tonight? That is exactly the question Alexander's generals asked him the night of October 30th, 331 BC. His most experienced commander, Parmenion, came to his tent with an idea. A night attack. Hit them before dawn. They won't see us coming. The darkness is our ally. And Alexander, 25 years old, already a legend, already something that history had never seen before, said no. I will not steal my victory. Think about that sentence. Chew on it for a second. That is not just confidence. That is not just arrogance. That is a man who understood something fundamental about power. That defeating Darius in the dark would be a military success, but what he needed was something larger. He needed to break the idea of Persian invincibility in broad daylight, in a way that no one could ever dispute or diminish. He needed Gaugamela to be undeniable. And if you're watching this right now, whether you're in Tehran or Tokyo, London or Lagos, New York or Nairobi or Hanoi, drop a comment and tell me where in the world you're watching from. Because we're about to go on a journey across 700 years of history, from the dust of Gaugamela in 331 BC to the blood-soaked fields of the Catalaunian Plains in 451 AD. 2 battles, 2 days. 2 moments where the entire trajectory of human civilization hung on the decisions of men under impossible pressure. Hit the like button. Subscribe if you haven't already, because this is history the way it actually felt, from the inside, with everything at stake. Let's go. Before we go any further, I need you to understand the full weight of what we're talking about. Not just the battles, the 2 fault lines of history itself. Gaugamela in 331 BC and the Catalaunian Plains in 451 AD are separated by nearly 700 years. They are fought on opposite ends of the ancient world, one in the heart of Mesopotamia, one in the wheat fields of Roman Gaul. They involved completely different civilizations, different weapons, different commanders. On the surface, They have almost nothing to do with each other, but they are connected by something deeper. Each is a hinge point, a moment where the world could have gone one way and instead went another. Where civilizations we know, the cultures, the languages, the religions, the political structures that shaped everything from the Renaissance to the modern nation-state, were either preserved or endangered by decisions made by two extraordinary men in the heat of two extraordinary days. Without Gaugamela, there is no Hellenistic world. Without the Hellenistic world, that extraordinary fusion of Greek rationalism, Persian administration, Egyptian mysticism, Babylonian astronomy, there is no cultural foundation for Rome's golden age. Without Rome's golden age, the intellectual inheritance that Europe built upon is fundamentally different. Alexander's victory at Gaugamela didn't just destroy the Persian Empire. It planted a seed that grew into the entire edifice of Western thought for the next 2,000 years. And without the Catalaunian Plains in 451 AD, that edifice might have been buried. Attila the Hun, the scourge of God, the man whose armies had burned and pillaged from the borders of China to the gates of Constantinople. By 451 AD, he had turned his gaze west, to Roman Gaul, to what remained of an empire that Alexander had, in some spiritual sense, made possible. And what stood between Attila and the complete dismemberment of Western civilization was a coalition so improbable it had no business existing, much less winning. These two battles are bookends, the creation of a world and its survival. Every serious historian who has studied these moments understands what was at stake. We're going to do justice to that weight, because these men, Alexander, Darius, Aetius, Attila, were not just generals. They were the forces through which history moved. And understanding how they moved it requires us to go all the way back to where the fault lines first cracked. It is 336 BC. Philip II of Macedon, the greatest military reformer of the ancient world, the man who took a backward northern kingdom and turned it into the dominant power of Greece, is assassinated at his own daughter's wedding. The murder happened in a theater, in broad daylight, in front of the assembled aristocracy of Macedonia. Philip was walking in a ceremonial procession, wearing white, unarmed, performing the kind of public display of confidence that powerful men perform when they want the world to see that they have no fear. He was stabbed by one of his own bodyguards, a man named Pausanias, whose precise motives remain debated to this day, with suspicion falling on everyone from Persian agents to his ambitious wife, Olympias, to his brilliant 20-year-old son, Alexander. What matters for our story is what happened next. Alexander moved with a speed that was not grief-stricken and was not cautious and was not uncertain. Within months, he had consolidated Macedonia. Within 2 years, he had shattered a Greek rebellion at Thebes with a ruthlessness designed to be exemplary, to make every other Greek city look at the rubble and decide that cooperation was more attractive than resistance. He then crossed the Hellespont into Asia and began what would become the greatest military campaign in human history. But before Gaugamela, before any of it, you need to understand what he was fighting against. The Persian Empire of 336 BC was the largest political entity the world had ever seen. It stretched from the Aegean coast of modern Turkey in the west to the borders of India in the east, from Egypt in the south to the steppes of Central Asia in the north. It encompassed dozens of distinct peoples, languages, religions, and cultures, all bound together by Persian administration, Persian roads, Persian tax collection, and the supreme authority of the King of Kings. Its cavalry was among the finest in the world. Its royal guard, the 10,000 immortals, were professional soldiers equipped and trained to a standard no Greek city-state could match. Darius III inherited this empire in the same year Alexander inherited Macedonia. And these two men, coming to power simultaneously, were about as different as two human beings placed on the stage of history can be. Darius was not a military genius. He was a competent administrator, a politically skilled survivor who had maneuvered to the throne through a series of palace intrigues. He thought in terms of resources: more men, more gold, more elephants, more scythed chariots, rather than in terms of system and flexibility. His first encounter with Alexander, at Granicus in 334 BC, ended in humiliation. His second, at Issus in 333 BC, ended in catastrophe. The companion cavalry punched through his left wing with such violence that the entire formation collapsed inward. And Darius, and this is critical, fled. He abandoned his army.
He left his mother, his wife, his daughters, and his treasury in Alexander's hands and ran. Alexander treated the royal Persian women with exquisite courtesy. He sent word to Darius: no harm would come to them. The gesture was simultaneously humane and psychologically devastating. It said, "I am more worthy of this empire than you are." Darius should have made peace then. He could have. Alexander had proposed terms, but instead he spent 2 years preparing the ultimate response. He chose his ground at Gaugamela specifically, sent workers to level and harden the plain for his scythed chariots. He assembled what ancient sources describe as an army of hundreds of thousands. He recruited the best Greek mercenaries money could buy. He added scythe blades to his war chariots, brought 15 war elephants from India, and positioned everything on carefully engineered terrain. 2 years of preparation. An army built specifically to destroy one man. Terrain engineered for maximum advantage. And still, Darius lost. Walk the Persian line at Gaugamela with me. Feel the weight of it. On the far left, the Bactrian cavalry. Men who grew up in the saddle, who could fire a bow with precision at full gallop, who had been fighting on horseback since childhood, in a landscape that made Greece look like a garden. The finest light cavalry in the ancient world. Alongside them rode the Dahae horse archers and the Aracosian and Indian cavalry, adding mass and ferocity to a wing designed to sweep everything before it. On the Persian right, Cappadocian and Armenian cavalry, supported by Syrian and Mesopotamian infantry, men fighting for their homes, their kingdoms, with something beyond coin to motivate them. In the center, Darius himself, in his golden war chariot, surrounded by his royal guard, the institutional descendants of the 10,000 immortals. Before him stood thousands of Greek mercenaries who fought in phalanx formation, remarkably similar to Alexander's own. This was deliberate. Darius had learned from Issus and recruited the best Greek military talent money could buy. And in front of all of it, the secret weapons. 200 scythed chariots, each one a 2-wheeled platform pulled by 4 horses, fitted with iron side blades at thigh height. Darius had literally flattened and hardened the dirt at Gaugamela to give them traction. 15 war elephants, each a moving fortress of armored muscle, weighing several tons, tusks capped with iron. Horses feared them. Men feared them. The smell of an elephant sent untrained cavalry into panic. Against all of this, Alexander had 47,000 men. A minimum 2-to-1 disadvantage, possibly 4-to-1. And yet, the man who faced those odds had not lost a single pitched battle. Not one. His army knew this. They had absorbed his confidence through years of shared triumph.
and shared danger. They had seen him lead from the front, seen him bleed, watched him stand over dying friends in the dirt of foreign battlefields. They would follow him anywhere. They already had. But follow him here? Against this? Think about what it feels like to stand there watching the Persian line stretch beyond your field of vision in both directions. Watching those chariots glitter in the morning light. Watching the elephants sway. Hearing the drums and war trumpets of 100 nations. Would you be afraid? Of course you would. Every honest soldier was afraid. The question was always what you did with it. Alexander's army was smaller. That was its only real weakness. In every other dimension, training, tactical flexibility, leadership quality, unit cohesion, and the confidence bred by consecutive victory, it was superior to anything Darius had assembled. At the heart of the Macedonian formation was the infantry phalanx. 6 battalions of heavy infantry, the hypaspists and the foot companions, arranged 16 men deep, each man carrying a sarissa, the 21-foot Macedonian pike that Philip II had introduced. When properly aligned, the phalanx presented an overlapping wall of iron pike tips to any enemy formation. 5 or 6 rows of sarissas projecting forward, creating a bristling hedge that no charging force could penetrate at the front. The phalanx didn't advance quickly. It didn't need to. It advanced steadily, inexorably, like a tidal wave in slow motion, grinding down whatever stood in its path. But the phalanx was only half of the equation. The other half, the truly decisive half, was the companion cavalry. Philip II had created the companion cavalry as the offensive hammer that worked in concert with the phalanx's anvil. The Macedonian aristocracy on horseback, sons of nobles and kings, equipped with the best armor money could buy. They carried the Zeiston, a longer, heavier lance than the javelins used by most ancient cavalrymen, designed for the concentrated impact of a head-on charge. They attacked in a wedge formation, point first, designed to punch through an enemy line and then expand the breach from within. The companion cavalry were Alexander's personal weapon. He led them himself always at the point of the wedge. Around these 2 core elements, Alexander built a layered system of supporting arms. The Salian cavalry on the left under Parmenion, tasked with holding while Alexander attacked on the right. Agrianian infantry and Cretan archers to screen the phalanx from missile fire. Scout cavalry probing ahead. And, in an innovation Alexander invented for this specific battle, a rearguard formation to catch any units attacking from behind as Persian numbers allowed envelopment. He didn't hope the envelopment wouldn't happen. He planned for it and prepared an answer. That is what made Alexander different. Not just courage. Every general can be brave. It was the combination of analytical precision and a gambler's intuitive boldness. The ability to plan for every contingency and then, in the heat of battle, recognize the exact instant when the plan could be abandoned for a decisive improvisation that the plan had made possible. He also drilled his troops specifically on the scythed chariots, opened deliberate lanes in the formation to let them through, then close on them from the sides after they spent their momentum. He understood Darius's psychology at a deep level. He knew the King of Kings had run once before at Issus. His entire strategy at Gaugamela was built around creating conditions to make Darius do it again. Because destroying the Persian army mattered less than destroying the idea of Darius. A king who runs loses, even if 100,000 of his soldiers survive. Imagine standing there in that formation, the dawn light just cracking over the horizon. The Persian line vast and terrifying across the flat ground ahead. Your king somewhere on the right wing, already moving, already calculating. The weight of a continent on his 25-year-old shoulders. Imagine knowing you are about to change history. The night of September 30th to October 1st, 331 BC, is one of the most psychologically revealing nights in all of ancient history. Darius's army did not sleep. The Persian commanders, afraid of a night attack exactly as Parmenion had proposed to Alexander, kept their entire force standing under arms throughout the night. Hundreds of thousands of men, on their feet, in armor, all night. No sleep. By the time dawn came, many had been awake for more than 24 hours. Alexander, by contrast, slept. He slept so deeply and so soundly that his staff had difficulty waking him on the morning of the battle. Plutarch records this.
Parmenion himself reportedly had to shake the king by the shoulder. When asked how he could sleep so peacefully on the night before the most critical battle of his life, Alexander reportedly said that he felt as though he had already won, that finding Darius, getting him to commit his entire army to a decisive engagement on a fixed field, was the accomplishment. The battle itself was merely the execution. That confidence, whether genuine or performance, transferred to his army. Men fight differently when they believe their commander believes they will win. Fear is contagious, but so is certainty. And the certainty of Alexander propagated through his chain of command with remarkable speed that night, while on the other side of the field, Darius's exhausted soldiers held their weapons in shaking hands and watched the darkness. Then there was the final diplomatic exchange. Darius offered terms, fantastic terms. Half the empire, his daughter in marriage, Alexander's recognition as co-ruler of Persia from the Euphrates westward.
Parmenion, when he heard the offer, said, "I would accept if I were Alexander." Alexander replied, "So would I, if I were Parmenion." Then he rejected the offer. There is nothing left to negotiate. Dawn is coming. The world is about to change. Think about that exchange. Two men, one impossible decision. A man who just said no to half the known world because he wanted to earn all of it. Not steal it, earn it. Let me walk you through this battle step by step, because Gaugamela is not just a great battle. It is a masterclass in what happens when tactical genius meets tactical rigidity. The Persian formation stretched approximately 3 miles across the flat plain. Darius positioned his force in a conventional structure. Cavalry on both flanks, infantry in center, himself in his golden chariot behind the infantry line, surrounded by royal guard. Scythed chariots deployed in front of the cavalry wings.
Elephants screened the central infantry. Alexander deployed his 47,000 men for a specific purpose. Not to match the Persian line, he couldn't with half the men. To find and exploit a gap. On his right wing, the decisive wing, Alexander placed the companion cavalry under his personal command. Beside them, the Agrianian infantry and Cretan archers to screen against missile fire. Then the Hypaspists serving as the hinge between cavalry and phalanx. Then the foot companions in their 6 battalions. On the left, Parmenion commanded the allied cavalry and Thessalians, with one order: hold, just hold, buy time. Here is Alexander's specific strategic insight that separates Gaugamela from every other battle of the period. He knew the Persian line was longer than his own. He knew they would outflank him on both sides. Instead of trying to match their frontage, which he couldn't do with half the men, he planned to use their flanking movement against them.
He would oblique his entire formation to the right as the battle opened. March rightward, steadily, drawing the Persian left cavalry after him. Make them move, make them stretch, make them commit. And in doing so, in chasing Alexander's rightward drift, the Persian left would create a gap between themselves and the Persian center. That gap was the kill zone. Modern analysts compare it to a matador drawing a bull. The bull charges with full power and commitment. In the moment it has fully committed, when it has passed the point of recovery, the matador steps aside and drives the sword home. The battle opened with the scythed chariots. 200 vehicles with spinning iron blades at thigh height, thundering toward the Macedonian phalanx's face. Terrifying. Designed to shred the formation before the infantry even engaged. But Alexander's light infantry opened deliberate lanes in the formation, created gaps through which the chariots raced, bleeding their momentum. The chariot drivers, committed to full speed, could not turn. They roared through and emerged behind the Macedonian line, where they were surrounded and destroyed. The surviving chariots careened aimlessly across the rear of the battlefield, causing some chaos, but not the catastrophic disruption Darius needed. The first Persian weapon neutralized. Then the battle on the left. The Persian right-wing cavalry slammed into Parmenions' position with enormous force. The Macedonian allied cavalry bent. Men died. The line wavered. It held, barely, consuming everything it had just to survive. Meanwhile, on the right, Alexander began his oblique march. Step by step, his wing moved rightward. The Bactrian cavalry moved to keep pace. Bessus, their commander, had to choose. Let Alexander march off the prepared ground onto uneven terrain, or commit his cavalry in pursuit. He chose pursuit. And as the Persian left wing surged forward, it stretched, it elongated. The connection between the Persian left wing and the Persian infantry center widened. A gap appeared in the greatest army in the ancient world, created not by force, by geometry, by Alexander making Bessus react instead of choose. That gap, narrow at first, then wider, then gaping, was the moment Alexander had been engineering since before the battle began. He wheeled the companion cavalry left, straight into it. Imagine seeing it from above, a bird's-eye view of the plain of Gaugamela on the morning of October 1st, 331 BC. To the left, massive cavalry engagements, swirling clouds of dust and horses, the Persian right crushing toward Parmenions' position, the Macedonian left bending but not breaking. Desperate, close-quarters chaos. In the center, the Macedonian phalanx advancing in its terrible, steady rhythm, sarissas leveled, the ground shaking under thousands of armored feet. Ahead of them, the Persian infantry center, deep, dense, held in place by Darius's presence behind them in his golden chariot. And on the right, Alexander. Gilded armor catching the morning light, his horse Bucephalus beneath him, the companion cavalry in their wedge formation. And ahead, a gap, growing wider by the second as the Persian left cavalry surges into its forward pursuit. The gap was perhaps 200 to 300 meters wide. In ancient battle terms, that is everything. Alexander didn't deliberate. He didn't call a council. He didn't send a rider to ask Parmenions' opinion. He turned his horse. He raised his lance. He pointed at the gap. 5,000 of the finest heavy horsemen in the world accelerated into a gallop. On the Persian side, what followed was a moment of crystalline horror for anyone who understood what they were watching. Bessus, having committed his cavalry in pursuit, was now too late to close the gap before the Macedonian hammer drove through it. The Greek mercenaries in the Persian center tried to seal the breach. They fought with desperate courage. They died for it. The phalanx drove into them from the front, while Alexander's cavalry hit from the flank. And no infantry force can survive a coherent attack on two axes simultaneously. The gap widened. And suddenly, for the second time in 2 years, Darius III, King of Kings, commander of the greatest army the ancient world had assembled, looked directly at Alexander of Macedon, charging toward him through a storm of dust and blood and screaming men. And he ran. He abandoned his chariot, too slow, too conspicuous. He mounted a horse, turned it east, and fled the field. Again. His royal guard fled with him. The center of the Persian army, without its anchor, began to dissolve. The ripple spread outward like a shockwave. Hundreds of thousands of soldiers didn't lose because they were cowards.
They lost because the one person whose presence held the entire system together had chosen his own life over the battle. In the Persian imperial system, built entirely around the divine authority and physical presence of the King of Kings, when the king runs, the army ceases to exist as a coherent force. Let that sink in. The largest army in the ancient world, broken not by brute force, by a gap 300 meters wide, opened by geometry, exploited in a single instant of irreversible boldness. Now it was slaughter. Not clean, not heroic. Not the sanitized version that bronze reliefs and marble friezes immortalize. Real battle. The pursuit after Gaugamela killed more Persians than the battle itself. That is almost always true of ancient warfare. You die when you run more often than when you stand, because running means your back is turned and there is no shield between your spine and the cavalry following you.
Thousands of Persian soldiers who had held their formation, who had fought and survived the initial engagement, died in the pursuit simply because they were trying to get home. Alexander himself received a desperate message from Parmenion as he was beginning the chase. The Macedonian left was in serious trouble. Mazaeus' cavalry had broken through in places. The Thessalians were exhausted. Parmenion needed help. Alexander wheeled the companion cavalry away from the pursuit of Darius and rode back to support the left flank. It cost him Darius. The King of Kings escaped to Ecbatana in Media, then to Bactria. He survived Gaugamela by less than a year, eventually murdered by his own satrap Bessus in a lonely roadside killing. Alexander, when he found the body, covered it with his own royal cloak and arranged for a proper burial. Even in death, Alexander controlled the narrative. He was not a barbarian conqueror. He was the legitimate successor. Babylon fell without a siege. The population, tired of Persian rule, opened the gates. He made offerings to the Babylonian god Marduk and ordered the restoration of Marduk's great temple that Xerxes had damaged. He presented himself not as a conqueror, but as a restorer. Susa fell. Persepolis fell. The treasury of Persepolis alone was so vast that Alexander needed 20,000 mules and 5,000 camels just to move it. He burned the great palace, a gesture ancient sources debate endlessly, some calling it deliberate revenge for the burning of Athens, some calling it a drunken accident at a party. Probably both things are true simultaneously. The Persian Empire, the entity that had dominated the ancient Near East for 2 centuries, that had burned Athens, that had seemed as permanent and inevitable as geography itself, ceased to exist as a political reality within 12 months of Gaugamela. It had taken Alexander 4 years to accomplish what every Greek statesman before him had dreamed of. And the world was never the same again. The Hellenistic world that Alexander built had 700 years of life ahead of it. Long enough that by the time the second battle we're here to discuss took place, in the scorching summer of 451 AD, on a plain in northeastern France, the world that Gaugamela had helped build was teetering on the edge of annihilation. Let's go there now. Before we dive into 451 AD, we need to understand the world as it existed when Attila turned his gaze westward. When Alexander died in Babylon in 323 BC, still just 32 years old, his empire immediately fractured. His generals, the Diadochi, tore it apart in 40 years of catastrophic civil war. What emerged was a collection of Hellenistic kingdoms: the Ptolemies in Egypt, the Seleucids in Syria and Persia, the Antigonids in Macedonia and Greece. These kingdoms fought each other constantly, but they shared Greek language and Alexander's administrative inheritance. Then Rome came.
Rome absorbed the Hellenistic world piece by piece over 2 centuries. Macedonia in 168 BC, Greece in 146 BC, Egypt in 30 BC, when Octavian defeated Cleopatra. Rome didn't destroy what it absorbed. It adopted it, transformed it, added Roman engineering and Roman law to Greek philosophy and Persian organizational sophistication. The result was a civilization of staggering power and complexity. At its height, under Marcus Aurelius in the 2nd century AD, the Roman Empire was home to perhaps 70 million people, a quarter of the entire human population of the planet. Its roads connected Britain to Mesopotamia. Its law codes formed the basis for legal systems still operating today. But Rome aged. The 3rd century AD was catastrophic. 50 years of near-continuous civil war. The empire survived through the iron discipline of emperors like Diocletian and Constantine, but never fully recovered its former cohesion. Constantine moved the capital to Constantinople in 330 AD. The Western Empire became progressively hollowed, its military increasingly composed not of Roman legions, but of Germanic tribal armies, foederati, fighting under their own chiefs, allied to Rome by treaty rather than citizenship. By 451 AD, the Roman army defending Gaul was more German than Latin, and its supreme commander was a man named Flavius Aetius, whose story is one of the most extraordinary in all of late antiquity. But first, let me tell you about the storm coming from the east. By 440 AD, the Hunnic Empire was the single most terrifying military force on Earth. The Huns are often misunderstood, reduced in popular imagination to an undifferentiated barbarian horde, savage and disorganized, overwhelming through sheer numbers and ferocity. The reality was considerably more sophisticated and, in some ways, more frightening. The Huns had first appeared on the European horizon in the 370s AD, emerging from the steppes east of the Volga River with a speed and violence that ancient observers described as supernatural. They were not European. They were not Germanic. They were a Central Asian nomadic people, part of the vast complex of steppe cultures that had been raiding, trading, and warring on the grasslands between China and the Caspian Sea for centuries. They destroyed the Ostrogoths almost immediately, then pushed the Visigoths south across the Danube, triggering the Battle of Adrianople in 378 AD, where Gothic forces annihilated a Roman army and killed the Emperor Valens. The arrival of the Huns set off the migration period, a chain reaction of population movements that destabilized the entire Western Roman frontier. For a generation, the Huns were more disruptive force than coherent political entity. Their chieftains raided and extorted, but no single king commanded the whole. Then came Attila. Attila became king of the Huns, jointly with his brother Bleda at first, then alone after Bleda's death, in what was almost certainly fratricide, around 434 AD. He was, by any measure, one of the most formidable rulers in the history of the ancient world. Not because he was a great tactical genius in Alexander's mold. He was a capable general, but not a battlefield wizard. What Attila was a supreme strategic organizer and a politician of ruthless brilliance.
He understood that the Hunnic military system, extraordinarily mobile, self-supplying, capable of rapid concentration and dispersal, was most effective against sedentary societies that couldn't match its speed. He understood that Roman gold was worth more than Roman land, that extortion was more efficient than conquest. Between 434 and 450 AD, he extracted enormous tribute payments from Constantinople, payments the Eastern Roman Empire made grumbling because the alternative was Hunnic armies at the walls of the city.
He ran the largest protection racket in history on an imperial scale. Then, in 450 AD, the Eastern Emperor Marcian refused to continue paying. Attila looked west. The Western Empire was weaker, more divided, its military resources thinner. Its emperor, Valentinian III, was a non-entity controlled by others. And there was one more provocation extraordinary enough to include here. A Roman princess named Honoria, desperate to escape an arranged marriage, had sent Attila a ring and a letter asking for help. Attila chose to interpret this as a marriage proposal and a claim to half the Western Empire as dowry. You cannot make this up. In 451 AD, he turned that claim into an army, crossed the Rhine, and drove into Gaul like a hammer. To understand the Catalaunian Plains, you need to understand what the Hunnic military system actually was, not the myth, the reality. The foundation was the composite bow. The Hunnic bow was one of the most sophisticated weapons in the ancient world. A recurved composite made from sinew on the back for tension, horn on the belly for compression, layers of wood in between, all bound with animal glue and cured over months. Perhaps 3 to 4 feet long, but capable of driving an arrow with tremendous force, accurate at 200 meters, lethal even against armored opponents at shorter ranges. The Hunnic warrior spent his entire life training with this weapon from childhood, learning to fire it at full gallop with precision that modern horse archers using reproductions still find astonishing to replicate. Hunnic battlefield strategy was built around a pattern ancient sources describe repeatedly. Feigned retreat, drawing an enemy forward into a pursuit, then wheeling and destroying them with missile fire while they're extended and disordered. It worked against the Goths. It worked against Roman cavalry. It worked against virtually every sedentary army that tried to engage on Hunnic terms. Logistically, the Hunnic army was self-sustaining in a way that would have seemed miraculous to a Roman logistics officer. Each warrior accompanied by 3 to 5 horses, rotating mounts to maintain extraordinary mobility. The horses ate grass. The warriors ate hard-dried meat and mare's milk and whatever they seized from the populations they passed through. Almost no supply train. The Roman army required enormous quantities of grain, fodder, a specialist corps of engineers and artisans, and administrative apparatus just to keep it moving. The Roman army was a city in motion. The Hunnic army was a storm. By 451 AD, Attila could field a force that ancient sources estimate, with characteristic exaggeration, at 500,000 to 700,000 men. More conservative modern estimates suggest 100,000 to 200,000 fighting men, including Ostrogoths, Gepids, Rugians, Burgundians, Alans, Thuringians, and others who fought under Hunnic command by conquest or alliance. This was not a raid force. This was a force designed to end a civilization. When he crossed the Rhine in the spring of 451, he moved through Gaul like a wave. Metz fell. Rheims was sacked. The path of Hunnic advance was marked by burning cities and mass flight. Contemporary sources describe destruction so complete that some areas of Gaul did not recover for generations. Think about that. Not for a year, for generations.
Now I want to tell you about the man who stopped him, because his story is, in some ways, even more extraordinary than the battle itself. Flavius Aetius, the last great general of the Western Roman Empire, the man his contemporaries called the last of the Romans. Aetius was born around 390 AD to a Roman military family. As a child, he was sent as a diplomatic hostage to the Goths, a standard practice of the period, exchanging high-born children as guarantees of treaty obligations. He lived with the Visigoths. He learned their language and their way of war. Then, in another diplomatic exchange, he was sent as a hostage to the Huns. He lived with the Huns for years. He learned the Hunnic language. He learned to ride in the Hunnic style. He learned the composite bow and the feigned retreat and the extraordinary mobility of steppe warfare. And he built something even more valuable: personal relationships with Hunnic nobles that would prove worth more than any military treaty. When he returned to Roman political life as an adult, Aetius was unlike any other Roman general of his generation. He understood the Huns from the inside. He understood the Germanic tribes from the inside. He could negotiate in 5 languages with warlords who had every reason to mistrust him. He used those Hunnic connections ruthlessly in his rise to power, calling in personal favors to support his position against Roman political rivals in the 430s. He became the single most powerful man in the Western Empire through relationships and willingness to use them, not through any legal title. The bitter irony of 451 AD. Aetius, who had spent decades leveraging Hunnic military power, was now facing his old friends across a battlefield. Attila and Aetius had met, possibly genuinely respected each other. None of that mattered now. Aetius needed to stop the invasion. But with what? The Roman military of 451 AD was approximately 15,000 reliable soldiers in the Western Field Army. Not enough to face the Hunnic host, not remotely. He needed allies, and getting them required a political miracle. He went, personally and alone, to King Theodoric of the Visigoths. Think about what that conversation required.
For 20 years, Aetius had been the man prosecuting Rome's policy against the Visigoths, fighting them, containing them, managing them as a problem to be controlled. And now he was asking them to fight beside him, against an enemy that had driven their ancestors across the Danube 50 years earlier. Theodoric agreed. Then Aetius gathered everyone else he could: Alans, Burgundians, Franks, Saxons, Riparian Franks. Every Germanic tribe with a reason to fear Attila and a fighting force worth having. He assembled, piece by piece, a coalition that had no business holding together. A Roman bureaucrat negotiating in multiple languages with warlords who hated each other only slightly less than they feared the Huns. It held, barely, temporarily, with the fragility of a coalition built not on shared values, but on shared terror. But it held long enough. Something you need to understand about Attila's campaign in Gaul: it was not going perfectly.
Gaul in 451 AD was not the open steppe where Hunnic advantages were maximized. It was a landscape of forests, rivers, and walled Roman cities, terrain where mobility counted for less and siege engineering for more. And the Huns were not great siege engineers. When Attila moved on Orléans, a critical city on the Loire River, he found determined resistance. Bishop Annianus organized the city's defense with extraordinary will. The city held day after day, sending desperate messengers to reach Aetius's army. Then Aetius came. The relief of Orléans arrived just as the walls were beginning to fail. Attila, seeing the scale of the coalition force,
made an intelligent decision: decline battle there. Withdraw eastward toward the open plains of Champagne, terrain where Hunnic cavalry could deploy properly. He was not running, he was choosing his ground. Aetius followed. He had no choice. Let Attila withdraw unmolested, and the coalition dissolves immediately.
He had to force a decisive engagement now. The armies met near Chalon-sur-Marne on the plains of Champagne in northeastern France. Late June 451 AD. The wheat stood in the fields. The summer sun beat down on men who had been marching for weeks. The day before the main battle, both armies jostled for position. The key terrain feature was a ridge of high ground dominating the field. Whoever held it could deploy downhill into the enemy formation, a significant tactical advantage. Aetius sent Thorismund, the son of King Theodoric, racing for the high ground with his cavalry. They got there first. The ridge belonged to the Romans and their allies. That night, Attila consulted his shamans. The traditional Hunnic divination, examination of entrails and bones, produced a troubling answer. The omens were bad. A great commander among the enemy would die in the coming battle. But Attila's side would not win. Attila gathered his commanders and gave a speech, recorded by the historian Jordanus, that was a masterpiece of psychological manipulation. Fortune is fickle. We have never feared battle. We will not fear it now. Let them have their omens. We have our swords. He then waited until 3 in the afternoon to begin the battle. Whether deliberate, limiting the daylight hours available for pursuit if his forces were broken, or simply logistical, the battle began late, and it became one of the bloodiest days in the history of the ancient world. Let me lay out this battlefield because terrain shaped everything. The plain of Champagne was wide and flat, ideal cavalry country, which is why Attila had chosen it. But cutting across it was the ridge of higher ground the Romans held. Downhill charges are faster. Downhill cavalry hits harder. Aetius deployed with cold political intelligence. Left wing, the Roman regulars and Aetius's most trusted troops, professionals. Aetius placed himself here. Center, the Alans. Their king, Sangiban, had actually been in negotiation with Attila before the battle, and might have been planning to switch sides. By placing them in the center, surrounded by more loyal allies, Aetius made their defection impossible. If the Alans broke and ran, they would have to fight through both the Roman left and the Visigoth right to escape. Cold-blooded political genius, disguised as tactical deployment. Right wing, the Visigoths under King Theodoric and his son Thorismund, holding the ridge. The most powerful single element in the coalition. Heavy cavalry, substantial numbers, genuine motivation. Attila deployed in mirror logic. His best Hunnic warriors in the center, directly opposite the Alans, the weakest link. Subject peoples, Ostrogoths, Gepids, other Germanic tributaries, on both wings, facing the Romans on the left and the Visigoths on the right.
Ancient sources describe losses of 165,000 dead, certainly exaggerated, but reflecting genuine catastrophic scale. Modern estimates range from 30,000 to 80,000 dead on both sides combined. Whatever the real number, the Catalaunian Plains ran with blood for an entire afternoon. Here is how it happened. Attila opened with his center driving hard into the Alans. The plan was textbook: break the weakest link, split the allied formation, then turn on the exposed flanks of the two broken halves. But the Alans, surrounded by their reluctant allies with no retreat possible, fought better than Attila expected.
Sometimes the removal of all options clarifies the mind wonderfully. On the right, the Visigothic heavy cavalry thundered down off their ridge advantage. Armored men on armored horses, downhill at speed, into the Ostrogothic and Gepid forces on Attila's left wing.
The physics of a downhill cavalry charge against men fighting uphill is not something willpower alone can neutralize. The Hunnic left wing began to collapse, and then King Theodoric died. Exactly how, thrown from his horse and trampled by his own charging cavalry, or struck by a Hunnic javelin, the sources disagree. What is certain is that the Visigothic king fell in the middle of his army's charge. For several critical minutes, no one on the Visigothic side knew whether to continue or stop to search for the body. Thorismund, his son, riding at the head of the charge, did not stop. He kept going. He drove his cavalry through the dying and the panicking, and then something happened that turned the entire battle. Thorismund's cavalry swung leftward, carried by momentum and the particular madness that heavy cavalry in full charge experiences, and crashed into the flank of the Hunnic center.
Attila's center, already struggling to break through the stubborn Alans, was suddenly under attack from the flank, from the high ground, by fresh Visigothic cavalry that had not yet exhausted itself in grinding infantry combat. This is the moment. This is when the battle turned. Attila had not expected this. No battle plan survives contact with the enemy, and this one proved it in the most dramatic fashion possible. The Visigothic cavalry that was supposed to be tied down fighting his left wing had instead exploded through it and was now curving into the rear and flank of his center. On the other side, Aetius's professional Roman soldiers were pressing forward. The Hunnic center was being crushed from three sides, and Attila, for the first time in his military career, possibly the first time in his life, was looking at a battlefield he was losing. The psychological effect on the Hunnic forces was severe. Not because they were cowards. They were among the most formidable fighters of the ancient world. But their entire military system was built around mobility. Advance, withdraw, feign retreat, maneuver, choose the terms of engagement at every moment. A surrounded Hunnic force had lost the thing that made it dangerous. They were being forced to fight like infantrymen, packed together on a shrinking patch of ground, unable to ride out of range, unable to set up the feigned retreat that had won them 1,000 battles. Attila pulled back. He contracted his forces toward his wagon lager, the vast circle of carts and wagons forming the Hunnic camp, and turned it into a fortified position. He lined the wagons with archers firing outward. He massed his cavalry inside for a potential breakout. He was, for the first time in his life, in a siege. The attacker had become the defender. The wolf was in the pen. As darkness fell over the Catalaunian Plains, body-choked, littered with the dead of 100 nations, Aetius faced the same fundamental decision Alexander had faced at Gaugamela 700 years earlier. Storm now, in the darkness? Finish it tonight? Or wait? Let that question sit with you for a moment, because what Aetius decided next would be debated by historians for the next 15 centuries. The night of June 20th to 21st, 451 AD, was one of the most consequential nights in the history of the Western world. Thorismund, searching for his father's body in the darkness, stumbled with a small escort onto the Hunnic camp's perimeter. He was nearly killed before his guards fought free. When he found Theodoric's corpse, his father dead in the moment of victory, grief colliding with the sudden weight of being king, he wanted to finish it. He wanted Attila tonight. Aetius, meanwhile, had become separated from the main body of his forces during the confused fighting. He had spent part of the night nearly alone, moving carefully through a darkness full of enemy soldiers and uncertain allies.
the most powerful man in the Western Roman Empire, wandering a battlefield in the dark. Dawn came. Attila was still in his fortified camp, still dangerous, still commanding perhaps 60 to 80,000 warriors, many unwounded and well-armed. A frontal assault on the lager in daylight would be enormously costly. But Attila was surrounded. The coalition controlled the field. No reinforcements were coming. Aetius made his decision. Don't storm the camp. Contain it. Wait. And more than that, he told Thorismund something remarkable. He told the new Visigothic king that he needed to go home, that his brothers might challenge his claim to the throne, that it was important to return to his kingdom immediately to secure the succession. This was true, and Aetius knew it was true.
And Aetius also knew that if Thorismund left with the Visigoth army, the coalition would lose its most powerful element. The pressure to force a costly assault would ease, and a weakened but living Attila would still serve a purpose as a counterweight against those very Germanic allies once the shared threat was removed. Aetius was choosing to let Attila live. Why? This is the question historians have argued about for 15 centuries. Some see cold Roman realpolitik. If Attila is destroyed, the coalition allies freed from common fear would immediately turn on each other and on Rome. Better a wounded Attila retreating across the Rhine. Some see a personal dimension. Aetius had known Attila, lived with the Huns, possibly felt something in another life that might have been friendship. Some see exhaustion and calculation. His army was tired, casualties severe, and a siege of a Hunnic lager with unwilling allies was a recipe for disaster. All of these interpretations contain truth. All of them are incomplete. Thorismund left. The Visigoths marched south. The coalition dissolved. Attila withdrew, battered, beaten by every military metric, but alive. He moved his forces eastward, back toward the Rhine. The following year, 452 AD, he invaded Italy. He sacked Aquileia so thoroughly it never recovered. The refugees fleeing into the Adriatic lagoons would eventually found a city called Venice. He devastated northern Italy. And then he turned back, never reached Rome. Ancient sources credit a meeting with Pope Leo I with persuading him to withdraw. More prosaic factors also mattered. Disease in his army, a Byzantine counteroffensive on his eastern flank, the exhaustion of northern Italy's portable wealth. In 453 AD, Attila died. On his wedding night, a new bride, a nosebleed that would not stop. His body found in the morning by his horrified attendants. Perhaps a ruptured blood vessel, perhaps acute alcohol toxicity. We will never know for certain.
The empire he had built shattered within a decade, torn apart by his sons and their subject peoples. The Catalaunian Plains had not killed him, but it had started the process. And Gaul, Roman Gaul, the seedbed of what would become France, and through France, so much of modern European civilization, survived. Let me bring you back to the beginning, to the question of why we're here. 2 battles, 2 days, nearly 700 years apart. Gaugamela, in 331 BC, changed the world by creating it, by destroying the Persian Empire and replacing it with the Hellenistic world. Greek language and Greek thought spread across the entire Middle East and Central Asia, fused with Persian administrative sophistication, Babylonian astronomy, Egyptian depth. From this fusion came the cultural foundations Rome inherited: the philosophy, the mathematics, the astronomy, the literary tradition.
Ideas that flowed through Rome into Christianity, and through Christianity into every subsequent century of Western intellectual life. Alexander at Gaugamela didn't just win a battle.
he planted a seed that took 2,000 years to fully flower. And the Catalaunian Plains in 451 AD protected that seed at the moment of its greatest vulnerability. Think about what happens if Attila wins. Not just in the immediate, the sacking of Gaul, the collapse of the frontier. Think about the next generation. The Hunnic Empire, energized by the conquest of the West's richest provinces, continues expanding. The Germanic kingdoms that might have preserved Roman institutions, the Visigoths who carried Roman law and Roman Christianity westward, the Franks who would eventually produce Charlemagne and the very concept of Europe, are either absorbed into Hunnic authority or swept away. The monasteries, where the intellectual heritage of Greece and Rome was being copied and preserved, the thread connecting Aristotle to the medieval universities, to the Renaissance, to the modern world, can be interrupted. None of this is certain. History doesn't work on straight-line projections, but the contingency is real enough that every serious historian of late antiquity has grappled with it. What Aetius accomplished at the Catalaunian Plains, with his impossible coalition of mutual enemies held together by shared terror, was buying time. Not a clean victory, not a permanent solution. Rome fell anyway in 476 AD, just 25 years later. The Western Empire dissolved, but dissolution is not obliteration. The Visigothic kingdoms that succeeded Rome in Gaul and Spain preserved Roman law. The Frankish kings who came after built their courts on Roman administrative models. The Church preserved the texts, the language, the intellectual tradition.
600 years after the Catalaunian Plains, a pope would call a crusade in Latin, Rome's language. And the knights who answered would carry, in their theological training and legal frameworks, ideas tracing back through Rome to Greece, and through Greece to the cultural explosion Gaugamela had made possible. That is the arc. That is the thread. From Gaugamela to the Catalaunian Plains. From the creation of a world to its desperate defense. Here is what I find most extraordinary about these two men, separated by 7 centuries. Both were political thinkers as much as military commanders. Alexander didn't just want to defeat Persia, he wanted to become it, to inherit its empire legitimately. Every decision at Gaugamela served that vision. The broad daylight battle, the courtesy to Darius's family, the offerings to Babylonian gods. He was building something larger than a military triumph. Aetius, letting Attila retreat from the Catalaunian Plains, was doing the same thing, thinking past the battle to the world that would exist after it. A world where the coalition would immediately fragment once the common fear was removed. A world where a weakened but living Attila might still serve as a counterweight. His decision was not mercy. It was strategy, of a very cold and very sophisticated kind. Whether it was right, history leaves genuinely open. Attila's invasion of Italy the following year cost thousands of lives and destroyed Aquileia. If Aetius had stormed the Lager at dawn, perhaps Rome's western provinces survive another generation. We cannot know. What we know is that the Catalaunian Plains did what it needed to do. It stopped the momentum, preserved the possibility of continuation, bought the time for the thread to remain unbroken.
1,500 years later, we are still here, still pulling on that thread, still carrying in our languages and laws and intellectual habits the invisible inheritance of 2 days separated by 7 centuries. One on a Mesopotamian plain, one on a French one. So let me ask you something directly. What does it mean that 2 of the most consequential days in the history of Western civilization hinged, in the end, on the personal decisions of individual human beings? On Alexander's refusal to steal his victory, on Aetius's choice not to finish his, on Darius's decision to run, on Attila's decision to wait until the afternoon. These were not forces of nature. They were men. Men with doubts and fears and relationships and histories that shaped how they thought and what they chose. Men who, in the critical moment, had to make a call with incomplete information under enormous pressure, knowing that history would judge them with a clarity of hindsight they did not have.
Every era has its Gaugamela. Every era has its Catalaunian Plains. The forms change, the weapons change, the stakes are framed in different terms, but the fundamental challenge never changes. You are given an impossible situation and told to find a way through it. Your preparation, your wisdom, your relationships, your courage, your ability to see clearly in conditions designed to make clarity impossible. These are all you have. And the question history asks forever is whether they were enough. For Alexander on October 1st, 331 BC, they were enough. Through the gap in the Persian line, through the dust and screaming, and the weight of the ancient world pressing down on him, he found the seam and drove through it. For Aetius on June 20th, 451 AD, they were enough. With a coalition that should never have held together, against an enemy that had swept everything before him for 30 years, on a plain in Champagne, with the Roman world burning around him, he found the ridge and held it. Neither victory was clean, neither was permanent. Neither solved the underlying problems that made the battle necessary. That is not how history works. History doesn't solve things. It just keeps happening, one impossible day at a time. But these two men on these 2 days gave the thread of civilization enough time to continue. And here we are. If this story moved you, if you found yourself in that darkness outside Gaugamela, or on that ridgeline above the Catalaunian Plains, I want to hear from you. Drop a comment. Tell me which commander you think made the better decision. Tell me whether Aetius should have finished Attila when he had the chance. Tell me which of these battles you find more extraordinary. Because these questions don't have clean answers, and that is exactly why they're worth asking. If you've made it this far, you already know what kind of channel this is. We don't do summaries. We don't do textbook timelines. We do history the way it actually felt, from the inside, under pressure, with everything at stake. If that is your thing, subscribe. There is more of this, a lot more. Alexander said he would not steal his victory. He was right. The greatest victories are the ones won in the open, in the light, so that no one can ever doubt what happened. This is what happened. Remember it.